Sat here waiting for my Riftbound packs to come in. Endstep, can you pull some strings and make them work on a Xerath deck? Xerath, I think, could be pretty cool. Interesting story about Riftbound is I actually was in the first big internal test outside of like the team themselves. This is like before it was even called Riftbound. I don't even remember. It had some silly code name that I don't even remember at this point. But I was in the first test, and the way that this test worked was there were no physical cards. So what you did was they sent everyone in the test a card file with all the cards in it, which they were literally working on during the tournament, which was really hard to get used to because the cards were like literally changing all the time. Not like the entire card is different, just like numbers would change, like they were tuning stuff. And so the way it worked was like you could contact the design director, Dave Guskin, and have him print out like cards for you, right? They had like a way to make proxies and stuff for the cards. So what I did was I made a deck based around, I think Artillery Ballista is the card that it ended up being. Because at the time in the card file and with the way that the rules worked at the time, Artillery Ballista looked really overpowered to me. I was like, this card looks crazy. I'm going to play any Artillery Ballista, and I'm just going to play exclusively around my Artillery Ballistas, right? Or my Ballistas or whatever. Because at the time, I think it was like 2 mana, cost nothing to tap and activate it. It was instant speed or reaction speed or whatever, right? It was just like an all-around all-star card. It seemed like to me. So I show up on the day of the first tournament that we had for this playtest, and I'm like, all right, where's my deck, man? And he gives it to me, and then I look at the card and it's like, wait a second. They nerfed this card. They nerfed the Ballista. The Ballista was like 4 mana, not instant speed anymore to activate, and it cost 2 or 3 to activate, something like that. So my entire deck just didn't work. Like, it was just legit awful. Because I built my entire deck around this card, which they then nerfed right before the first playtest tournament. So, yeah, it was a bit rough for me in that first tournament. I think I went like 0-2 drop or something like that. The 2v2 tournament was a bit better that we did later on. I teamed up with Yellow, who was also in the playtest. And we actually almost made it to top 4, even though, again, another funny like deck mishap. I sent my like deck list to to Dave to print it out for the day of the tournament, and he forgot. Like, he just missed mine somehow. And so I just had to play one of the decks that he had lying around, which I thought was like fine, but was not particularly good when comboed with Yellow's deck. He was playing Yasuo. We still actually were very, very close to making it to the top 4 of the tournament, but unfortunately didn't quite get there. Anyway, I have some Riftbound cards I'm shuffling here right now. This is, I think, my favorite of the cards that I have here is the Teemo. The Teemo special. But yeah, I'm working on building up a Teemo deck. It is hard, though. Like, just getting your hands on Riftbound cards is so hard right now. Even as a Rioter, I don't like have any super special privileges. I got 1 pack for free. And the the box, whatever that thing is called. The like box with the starter decks in it. That's all I got as a Rioter. I don't have any special access to packs, nothing. Got to figure it out how to get Riftbound cards on my own. So I'm out here wheeling and dealing, trying to trade cards out to get my Teemo deck going, and it's hard going out here, man. I have like half the deck built, I think, of the cards that I want. So we'll have to figure out if I can get the rest at some point. Going back to talk about the variance in card games, it's a really interesting topic. One of the things that I think Riftbound does really, really well that I think makes Riftbound like a really interesting card game is it does some of the variance from game to game through the locations. Not literally just the locations themselves, right? Like, which location is it? Like, is it the one where you, make a recruit when you hold it? Is it the one where you can have an extra secret, et cetera, where it's like, yes, the locations themselves are different, but just like whether you have whether you're able to actually conquer and hold a point, whether your opponent is able to conquer and hold, etc., leads to a lot of game-to-game variance, right? It's like, it's pretty rare that you play like 5 games in a row against, the same deck to same deck, and you actually experience that same early game playing out. Whereas in other games that are just determined by life totals, one of the reasons why Magic really, really, really wants that extra game-to-game variance is that ultimately, when you go 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop in Magic, the thing that you do if your opponent isn't doing anything is you just attack their face, right? And often it doesn't even matter if they had their own 2-drop. Maybe they trade for your 2-drop or whatever. But the variance there, like a lot of the variance in Magic comes from, people stumbling on or having extra lands later in the game, especially, but even in the early turns. And that makes up for the fact that because you're always attacking the enemy face, there's less variance in how the early games play out, which then of course leads to less divergence in the remaining parts of the game, right? Because you can kind of think of it as like a tree. The more divergence you have in the early game, the more disparate paths you have later on, because it kind of like each branching line leads to then branching scenarios off of itself. And I think one of the clever things about Riftbound is the locations themselves lead to these really, really, really branching scenarios that helps give you a lot of that variance, even though Riftbound doesn't have variance on resource generation like Magic does, which is pretty cool. I remember my first game of Riftbound, like when I was in that playtest that I was talking about earlier, like the first internal Riot test that was like for people not working on the game at the time. When I played my first game, I remember thinking like, oh, like this game is going places. Like this there's so much about this game that just makes sense. Like it just works, right? It's like the locations actually make it feel very different and refreshing to me comparatively to the other card games. I've played a lot of card games in my day, right? Because I played, probably thousands of hours of Magic at this point, and hundreds of hours of a number of other games. Hearthstone, Duel Masters, etc. Right? It's like I played a lot of hours. Like I played a lot of the WoW TCG, right? Like I played a lot of different card games. Oh, Elements, that's another good one. I played a lot of card games, and one of the things that I think really makes Riftbound feel very different, and like the way that it plays out is like very different and refreshing, and it gives it variance in a really good way, is the locations. Like I think that a huge part of what makes Riftbound interesting is the locations, and that's really compelling to me, which I'm super, super, super big fan of that. Even though I didn't like it as much in Snap, I felt like was, at least for me personally, a bit too simple in a lot of ways, where it's like the depth that I was looking for was not there. The way I described it, I think after the first day I played Riftbound to other people, was like, Riftbound feels like it's it takes you like 1/5 the time to understand how to play Riftbound comparatively to Magic, but it has like 90% of the depth in like most cases, and in some cases it has less, and in some cases it has more compared to Magic, right? Like the locations give so much depth around the strategy of the game that is really, really, really big in a way that's very, very simple and doesn't require super complex rules and mechanics that Magic has, which is really nice. I personally really like that. I enjoy that aspect of Riftbound for sure. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has free cast costs like Hearthstone, but the variance comes from a resource actually being extremely limited. One card draw is rare and comes at a premium price, like getting rid of 10 cards from your 40 card deck. Yeah, I really like. I never played Yu-Gi-Oh! Seriously. Like I played it when I was very, very young. Like just terrible decks, right? Like that. Me and my friends played with each other. But Yu-Gi-Oh's resource system, I think, relies very heavily upon them making new mechanics, right? Like making new. Hey, here's a new type of summoning that requires a different different inputs and stuff, which is like I think a fine way of designing your game. Like I don't think that's necessarily bad. I think the way that Yu-Gi-Oh does their like printing of new cards and like cycling of old cards out offends me a little bit. Like the way that they just like force cycle cards by like, hey, this archetype has been completely invalidated by this other archetype. Okay, we're going to now print a bunch of support for that old archetype, which will now invalidate the other archetype that previously superseded it. Is like, to me, that's not that compelling. I think it's actually kind of similar in some ways to one of the problems that Lore had, which was that Lore had a problem where I think Lore's card design, they actually over-supported their champions. And so decks devolved to being like, okay, I'm playing this champion, therefore I need these 16 support cards for this champion. Also, this is the best pairing champion to go with this champion, and that champion needs 12 support cards to go alongside it or whatever, or I don't know, like 4 support cards. It's like, okay, so I really don't have many flexible slots in my deck. Like everything felt like really really sacred in terms of like hard synergies with champion cards, which were very hard to get away from, and hard synergies between champions that were hard to get away from. So you had these like hard locked pairings a lot of the time, where then there were these hard locked synergy support cards, and then very little of your deck could be modified. And even for the parts of your deck that could be modified, there wasn't a lot of reason to modify your deck because you had perfect access to every single card. Even as like a random casual player, it was very easy to go online, copy a deck list, and then just immediately make that deck because there was no friction on card acquisition. Now, I'm not saying that lore wasn't very generous, right? It's like it absolutely was, and that was very nice from a monetary perspective, don't get me wrong. But I think that lore being as generous as it was, compounded with some of the other things they did with the champion and card design in the game, and how they, I think, overly supported their champions with other card designs, led to the game feeling pretty stale for a lot of people pretty quickly, because there just ended up not being, even though they could actually balance the different decks, it was very hard for them to actually make diversity of like, well, how many Azir decks are there? Well, there's pretty much just one, right? It's like this the Aurelia Azir deck, right? It's like, how many Soraka decks are there? Well, pretty much just one, right? Like there's the Soraka Kench deck, right? And so on and so forth. It's like you had a few champions that had multiple different pairings they could play, but it felt pretty restrictive where it was like, you're just playing the Soraka deck or you're just playing the Talia deck or whatever, right? In lore. And I think that was one of the big things that led to the downfall of the game over time, which was unfortunate because I did enjoy the game for sure. Though Path of Champions is nice.